Hello, everyone. I want to talk to you guys about why I talk about depressing and dark subjects on this channel. I have talked a lot about depressing things on this YouTube channel, and I thought that it would be interesting to explain why I have so many videos on dark subjects. There's something very deep about discussing depressing things. To be honest with you guys, it's actually hard for me to explain this. It's actually difficult for me to put into words why I see dark subjects as important for discussion. But I'm going to try to do this on this video, regardless as to how challenging it can be for me. I see it as important to talk about dark and depressing things because it is an intricate part of the human experience, and it is an intricate part of human existence. We have good people and we have evil people. We all know this. But I feel sometimes that we as humans, we tend to ignore or overlook, or we try to explain away the reality of evil, because the reality of evil, the reality of the existence of evil people amongst us scares us, and that's understandable. It's understandable as to why people would want to explain away the reality of evil people, because it's scary. It's scary to know that there are evil people amongst us. It's like when you go online and you look up the database for child predators, for pedophiles, and you find out, wow, there are actual pedophiles living in my neighborhood. And just knowing that is scary enough. Just knowing that is pretty disturbing. And it makes you wonder, what kind of people are living in our midst? Yes, we have good people. Yes, most people, I think, are decent. Most people know the difference. Everyone knows the difference between right and wrong. Evil people know that what they're doing is wrong. Most of us want to do good. Most of us want to do the right thing. Most of us don't want to do evil things, be evil, act evil. Most of us don't want to do that. There is a minority of the human population that is extremely evil and extremely sinister and ruthless, and they actually take pleasure in doing horrific things. One thing that I have noticed over the years is that there are a good number of people who try to make excuses for evil activities, for evil actions. And they'll say things like, well, it's because of poverty. Or they'll say things like, well, it's because maybe they had bad childhoods. We need to be more understandable. We need to see the good in people. And I believe in seeing the good in people because we all do wrong, right? We all sin. So I do see the importance of seeing the good in people, but at the same time, there are people who are so evil and so ruthless and so cruel that I do not see the point in using this sort of talk of seeing the good in people when it comes to these types of offenders, these types of people who will go around and do the most egregious, the most heinous, the most sinister of actions. I just don't see the point of talking about seeing the good in people when it comes to discussing these types of criminals, these types of extremely diabolical and sinister people. Now, why does God allow evil? And I think this really, really gets to the heart of this discussion. Why does God allow evil? Why does God why did God create the world in a way where evil is allowed to happen? And this is a huge existential question. And this has been a question that I've wondered about for a very long time. And I know that a lot of people have been wondering about this. It's an extremely existential question that leads to, or I should say, can lead to an existential crisis. Because sometimes, just checking my mic, sometimes it gets a little bit difficult and challenging, mentally speaking, to have faith in the midst of evil, right? Like, we read the Bible and we read about a loving God. We read about a merciful God. We read about a God of justice. And then we hear about people like Dennis Rader. Dennis Rader was, for those of you who don't know, Dennis Rader was an American serial killer who murdered a whole bunch of people. And he went to church every week. He went to church every Sunday. He went to the weekly Bible studies. He was a Boy Scout leader. He was perceived by his neighbors, by his friends, as a family man, as a godly man. But yet, in secret, he was a cross-dressing serial killer. He was a pedophile. He was an absolutely, utterly satanic individual. And it's hard for me to even see someone like Dennis Rader as a human being, because the person has no humanity. And he's still stuck rotting in prison, where he should have been given the death penalty years ago. But they gave him life in prison because the state of Kansas, where he committed his murders, did not have the death penalty when he was found guilty of his crimes. But knowing about these types of people, knowing that these types of people actually exist, knowing about genocides and massacres makes you wonder, why does God allow evil? Why couldn't God just make the world in a way where we're all nice to each other, where we're all civil with each other, where we're not evil, or we don't have to even think about, the reality of evil? And I've thought about this for a long time, and this is pretty much what I've concluded. And, some of you guys may have come to the same conclusion, I don't know. But here's pretty much what it comes down to. God created the world. He created human beings. And he created human beings to love him. The reason why God created humans was because he wanted to create a creature that would love him. He created animals, and he created all these different living organisms, plants, bacteria, birds, insects. But these creatures are all wired, to do certain things. And they're completely under the control of their own natures. But he wanted to create something in his image. And by his image, I mean he wanted to create a creature that would have free will, that would be able to choose between good and evil. And the reason for this was because God wanted to create a creature that would want to love him. He didn't want to create a creature that would worship him because he was designed to worship him. He wanted to create a creature that would have the choice to love him. Why? Because when someone chooses to love someone else, that is sincere love. If someone loves someone, and I say this word liberally, if somebody reveres someone else, if someone dedicates his life to someone else because he is or she is hot-wired to do so, or this person was brainwashed to do so, the question comes, is that really sincere love, or is that just the result of upbringing and or brainwashing? So God wanted to create a creature that could choose to love him or could choose to hate him. That way, the humans that would love God with sincerity. And it would be true love. It wouldn't be love by design. It wouldn't be love that is a result of impulses in the brain. It's just like that film Coming to America. It's not just like it, but there is a parallel to be made in the movie Coming to America starring Eddie Murphy. It's a great movie. It's an old comedy. I think it came out back in the 80s. I've seen that film many times, and let me tell you, it's a great work of comedy, and it's a great work of film, really. And it's a really interesting story. It's a story about an African king. He's the king of a fictional country called Zamunda, and he wants to get married. He wants to find his queen. His queen to be. He wants to find his queen, and there is a woman that was literally chosen and raised as a child to love this king, played by Eddie Murphy. And his name is Akeem. His character's name is Akeem. And so he meets this woman, and she does everything he wants. He tells the woman to bark like a dog, she barks like a dog. He tells the woman to jump up and down, she jumps up and down. And she is a robot. She is a complete robot. And she was brainwashed as a child to revere Akeem. And Akeem's right-hand man, I think his name is Simi, he tells Eddie Murphy's character, this woman was raised as a child, to revere you, to love you. She's the perfect bride for you. Just marry her and live your life, have children with her, and just enjoy your life with her. She'll do whatever you want. And Eddie Murphy's character says, I don't want this because it's not sincere love. It's not real love. It's just brainwashing. It's just upbringing. I want to meet a woman who loves me for who I am, not what I am, being a king. And I want to marry a woman who chooses to love me, not revere me because she was brought up to revere me. And you could look at the story in a way that says, Akeem was being foolish because he had this woman who revered him, and he could have just married her and be done with it. But I agree with Akeem. I agree with Eddie Murphy's character. Like I don't want someone who just reveres me because she was brainwashed to. That would be, to me, it would just be annoying and cringe and very awkward. But I think that the same can be applied to explain the way that God made us and the reason why God made us. God made us to love him, but God made us in a way that we can choose to love him. And so he wanted to create a creature that could choose to love him or hate him. And that way, those who hate God, they choose to hate God. And they hate God sincerely. And God knows what's in their hearts. And he allows them to hate him because he wants people to love him because they want to love him. And those who want to love him choose to love him. And it's sincere. And God wants a love that is sincere, not one that is based off of neurological impulses or by design. And so that is why God allowed evil, because he wanted people to choose to love him. And those who would choose to hate him, well, they're going to do evil things. And when God created us, I think that, I don't know how it went down. I don't know if there was any discussion between God and the angels, but I imagine to myself, God thinking about creating us and saying maybe to his angels, I want to create a creature to love me, and I want to create a creature who would choose to love me, who would have the freedom to love me. And I don't want to use the word conundrum or predicament, but there's a situation where God could create a creature that would love him because he was designed to love God, and he was hardwired to love God, and he would love God no matter what, not by choice, just by design. But in that case, it wouldn't be real love because it wouldn't be sincere. It wouldn't be by choice. And then The other option, the other situation would be God creating us in a way where we can choose to love him or hate him. And God chose the latter of the two situations because he wanted sincere love. And in that place, in this realm of creation, in this decision, the risk of evil taking place was allowed. The risk was allowed. Because if God made us to love him by force, then it wouldn't be sincere. But because he wanted sincere love, he allowed for the risk of evil existing to occur, to transpire. And that is why God allows evil, because he wants sincere love. And those who choose to hate God, they're going to choose evil. But at the same time, those who love God do so in sincerity. And so it is in this reality that we have an awareness of evil's existence. And having an understanding of evil allows us to be, as Jesus said, as wise as doves, or as innocent as doves, and as wise as serpents. Understanding the ways of evil, understanding that there is evil, and there is evil that cannot be explained away. There is evil that cannot be given excuses. And I've read about a lot of evil things, and I know you guys have as well. Today I was reading more about the Heos Massacre. In my last video I talked about this. And in the Heos Massacre, I talked about this in my last video. But in the Heos Massacre, which took place in 1822, the Ottoman Empire butchered around 25,000 ethnic Greeks on the island of Heos in the year 1822. Why? Because some Greek rebels decided to enter the island and tried to convince the people to join the Greek War for independence from Ottoman rule. The small presence of rebels in the island was enough to enrage the Turks, and they saw this as an opportunity to orchestrate a massacre. And there was a horrific massacre. Tens of thousands of people were butchered. And thousands, this is what I've read, thousands of women were raped. 45,000 people were enslaved. And thousands more were driven out. About 10 to 20,000 people were driven out. 10 to 20,000. And it wasn't just in Heos where these massacres took place. There was massacres throughout Greece by the Ottomans, and there were Greek children who would eventually, because they were orphans, their parents were massacred, they would go to America. And I want to read to you guys a line from the Greek writer Constantine G. Hatzidimitriou, and this is what he wrote. He said, naval records indicate that 4 Greek boys were taken about the famous American frigate, the USS Constitution, when it docked at the island of Milo on April 8, 1827. One of these youths was 8-year-old George Sidion, who was befriended by Lieutenant Robert Randolph, the ship's purser, who was from a famous Virginia family. The orphan was originally from the island of Posada and was saved by his mother, who he saw the Turks kill. Now, I can't imagine, I cannot fathom watching my mother being murdered. But this is what happened to this boy. And it's like one of the most horrific things that I can think about is watching my mother being murdered. It's something that, if I were to experience that, it's something that I would literally never recover from. And it's difficult for me to even put this into words. But it bothers me so much that things like this actually have happened and still happen. And believe it or not, this actually happened in America. I mentioned Mr. Dennis Rader. This is the American serial killer in Kansas. Dennis Rader murdered a woman in front of her child. And that young boy grew up completely lost. Not completely, but very much so lost and very much so devastated by what he saw, understandably so. And it's so horrific to think that these things happen. And you read about the Armenian genocide, you read about the Heos Massacre, you read about all these atrocities, and you think, my God, why does this happen? Why does this happen? It happens because human beings were given the choice between good and evil. Because God wanted sincerity, and he still wants sincerity. And he even gave this choice to the angels. He created the angels with a choice because he wanted the angels to worship him. The angels are worshiping him right now. And he allowed the angels to have a choice between good and evil. And a third of the angels chose evil. And there is a tradition in Christianity, and this is also taught in the Islamic religion, that God told the angels to bow down to humanity, to bow before Adam. And this was taught in Christian tradition, but it's also taught in the Quran. And it's obvious that the Muslims took it from Christian tradition. And Lucifer basically said, who is man that I should worship, or not worship, but who is man that I should bow down to him? Who is man that I should prostrate myself before him? And the reason why God wanted angels to bow to humanity was because humanity was made in God's image. And the devil did not like this. Lucifer did not like this. And he fomented a revolution. And he told the other angels, and I imagine this happening. I imagine the devil telling the angels, who is this God that he can tell us what to do? He thinks that he's the leader of all of us. He's nothing but a tyrant. And I think that I imagine the devil being like a sort of, edgelord, internet armchair warrior, who acts like a troll, trying to provoke people and trying to stoke people into violence and to stoke people into revolt and revolution. And I imagine the devil saying things like, who is this God that he should tell us what to do? Kind of like how the Pharaoh told Moses, who is God that I should listen to him? And most of the angels didn't listen to the devil, but a third of them did, and they chose evil. And those angels who chose evil, they can never go back. They can never go back to being good angels. It's impossible. Why? Because angels were created as eternal beings. They were created as beings who were in heaven, who had... They were created as beings who have an eternal understanding of God. Because they don't have flesh like we do. They have an eternal understanding of God. They were in heaven, and because they have an eternal understanding and awareness of God, when they chose evil, they took a step that they could never retract from. They took a step that they could never go back from. It was a step that they could not rescind. Because they had an understanding, an eternal understanding of God, an understanding of God that we as humans can't have because we have our flesh. And so when they made that step towards evil, it was a complete acceptance and submission to evil. It was a complete acceptance and submission to evil. And they can and they will never return to good. Because they made an eternal step towards evil. Whereas with humans, it's for the most part different. And St. Paul says that humans are a little bit less than the angels because we were made with flesh. And because we were made with flesh, with impulses, with fleshy desires, with also with the demands of the flesh, because we were made with these things, our understanding of the eternal and our understanding of God is fragmented. It's fragmented with our sinful nature. And so because of this, human beings can choose to do wrong, but can take a step back and say, you know what, I did something wrong, I shouldn't have done it. Now, there are some human beings who are so evil that that they will never, I'm not saying it's impossible that they can return to good, because they can, but they will never go back to being good. Because they have completely subsumed themselves into the realm of darkness by their own choice. Now, they can leave their ways, sure, but they won't. Because they're that deep into sinisterism. They're that deep into the diabolical, into evil. I'm talking about the Ted Bundys. I'm talking about SS officers. I'm talking about Ukrainian nationalist who didn't mind eviscerating pregnant women in Volyn. That sort of evil. And those people, I believe, are overtaken by demons. We all have sinful natures, and we all sin. Most of us, we do sin, but we're still at the point where we know we've done wrong. We take a step back. But there are some people who are so evil that they submit themselves to evil. And I believe that those people become sons of Belial. They become sons of darkness, sons of Lucifer. It's like what Jesus told the Pharisees, you are of your father the devil. Those people were so evil. I mean, they murdered Jesus Christ. They were so evil that Jesus called them the son of the devil. That's how evil they were. And so I look to the reality of evil because God wants us to. And Jesus speaks of the reality of evil. He goes to the leaders of the Hebrews and he says, you are of your father the devil. He goes to the man who's possessed with demons, and he's so possessed that people put him on chains, and he breaks the chains, and he's roaring at night, and he's living in tombs, and he probably got possessed because he was trying to contact the dead, and Jesus goes and exorcises the man. He goes to a possessed man who says, I am legion, for we are many, meaning I am possessed with a legion of demons. And Jesus Christ exorcises that man. So God wanted us to understand the reality of evil. He wants us to acknowledge it. And you could say, well, Ted, it's easy to acknowledge it. And it is easy to acknowledge it. But, the reality is that there's enough people who don't acknowledge it to the point where their lack of acknowledgement or their refusal to acknowledge evil leads to destructive consequences. Like, for example, look at California, how thieves have been running rampant because the government will say that, hey, you can steal under $1,000 worth of products and you won't be charged with a felony. Okay. And a bunch of people take advantage of that. And they'll say, well, we put these laws in because people are suffering from poverty and we can't be so harsh. And these people reject the reality of evil. They reject the reality of evil because if they did acknowledge evil, they would understand that such an edict, such a leniency on crime, would enable criminals to take advantage of such leniency, and they will continue on with their ways and create more destruction. And so our lack of acknowledgement of evil or our refusal to be aware of evil leads to very destructive policies that lead to legislation that criminals can take advantage of, and they can create more evil in such an environment. So, looking at all this evil in the world, basically what happened was the fall of the angels, the fall of 1/3 of the angels, continued on into humanity. Like I said, God created the angels with a choice, and 1/3 of the angels chose evil. And that war continued on into earth. And so we ask the question, why does God allow evil? For one, like I said, he wants free will. He wants a sincere love for him. And because he wants a sincere love for him, he allows people to reject him. And when people reject God, they choose evil. It's like that verse in the Old Testament, all those who hate me love death. And so that war that began in heaven continued on here on earth. And that war continues on. That war continues on. That war between angels and demons, it's right here on earth. And the angels and the demons, they're using us as their proxies. And you have the demons influencing people, and they're using those people as their proxies. And the good people, they are the proxies of God. They are the proxies of heaven. And we are in a war. We can sit here and say, well, God allows evil, and the world is such a dark place, etc., etc. And it is a very dark place. It is. Life is kind of depressing, I'll be honest with you. But at the same time, when we change our mindset, we don't become complete doomers. And the reason for this is because we can acknowledge that this life is a war. In the book of Job, it says the life of man is a life of war. It is. It's a war. It's a spiritual war. It's a war between good and evil. And once we can acknowledge that, then acknowledging the reality of evil becomes a lot easier. Anyway, you guys just heard some theology. God bless.